Thank you for joining me today on this episode of The Physician's Mind. Today I'm honored to have Dr. Jesse Rockmore on the show. He's an esteemed urological surgeon from Dahlonega, Georgia. He got his undergraduate degrees in psychology and biology at the University of North Georgia. He went to medical school at Edward Via College of Osteopathic Medicine in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He completed his general surgery residency at Wayne State University and went on to complete his urological surgery residency at Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. He specializes in minimally invasive supine percutaneous nephrolithotomy procedures to complex stones, and he's also specialized in single-port robotic surgery. He's currently one of the few people in the South doing these kind of procedures. He holds positions as faculty at the VCOM College of Osteopathic Medicine, and he's a delegate to the South Carolina Osteopathic Medical Society. So Dr. Rockmore, you've got a very impressive background. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Curtis. Thank you. Appreciate that introduction, and thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet a fellow Michigan Stater. So,
Absolutely. Go Spartans. So Dr. Rockmore,
yes.
please just tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where you're from? What do you like to do for fun?
Right. I grew up in a town called Dahlonega, Georgia, rural northern part, lower part of the Appalachian Trail, and ended up branching out and going to a medical school that really cared about placing doctors in rural and underserved areas. And so that's where I ended up at Edward Via College of Osteopathic Medicine. And then by way of the match, ended up in Detroit, which was unusual, but had a good time there. As a general urologist, I have a lot of passion for that. And so that's why I wanted to specialize in the things you kind of talked about. We can always talk about those going on. And then for my spare time, I like to fish. I have a dog, a Springer Spaniel. You might hear her in the background. She's upset she's not here on the podcast also. And I currently practice in South Carolina. Going to school in South Carolina kind of led me to getting a job back in South Carolina. I'm in Sumter in a private practice working, doing general urology, doing stones, doing cancers. And I'm about an hour and a half out of Charleston, is where Sumter's located. So that's a little bit of a vignette about me. So
Fantastic. So going back many years in time now, what piqued your interest in a medical career? Why did you want to go to med school in the first place?
Right. So I graduated college during the recession and actually had a degree in psychology, and I had gotten into grad school, but the economy wasn't great. And my grandfather ended up getting bladder cancer. And so I was raised by my grandparents. And so I moved back in with them and took a job near them to kind of help with that. And then it was a job in operations management. It was blue collar. I worked for advanced disposal, kind of something I didn't really want to do. And so when he needed more care, I chose the option to kind of go back part-time to take the prerequisites for medical school. And had never really planned to do urology. I'd kind of been immersed trial by fire because of his illness, and he had to have a cystectomy, had his bladder removed, his life completely changed. And so I was going to do just primary care throughout medical school. And then kind of the story I had lived with my grandfather had gotten me in rooms with people that knew people with urology. And so I had an aptitude for it, and they kind of helped me along the way. So there's a lot of people that I'm really grateful for, kind of put me in the rooms with the people that needed to be able to help me so that I could achieve being a urologist. It's not common for an osteopathic graduate to be a urologist. There were very much a minority. That's why I have a lot of love for Michigan State, because, they have multiple osteopathically driven programs that they make osteopathic surgeons of all different kinds. And so I was very lucky to be trained at one of those. And it's just, this path kind of started years and years ago, just by serendipity. So none of this was really planned along the way. I got a lot of luck, a lot of good opportunity. And they say that luck is when opportunity meets effort. So I like to believe that.
Well said. Could you please define kind of some of the differences between an osteopathic physician and an allopathic physician for those of the listeners who don't know?
Right. So both go to undergraduates in some whatever type of program, have to meet some kind of standards and prerequisites and MCAT entrance exams, although the field is kind of getting away from that. But in the schooling of an osteopathic and an allopathic physician, you learn kind of everything that you would expect to learn as far as pathophysiology, medication, pharmacology, diseases, anatomy. There's an extra flavor to osteopathic medicine that really looks at how the body functions as a whole, as far as muscles, bones, nerves, what we call osteopathic manipulative medicine. That if I had to, and as if I had to describe it to a layperson, it's a combination of almost like physical therapy with chiropractic, with I want to say massage, with the understanding of tissue texture planes. I think one reason why I have a lot of love for being a DO is because as a surgeon, we operate with our hands. And from day one of an osteopathic education, when you begin to learn the osteopathic tenets, you understand what tissue texture feels like. You're taught very much to feel things with your hands. That was a very good primer for becoming a surgeon, where you work with your hands. So if I had to just boil it down, it's like everything an MD would learn, we learn that plus a little extra.
Absolutely. Yeah, fantastic description there. Well said. So you went to your undergraduate school at University of North Georgia and ended up in medical school at Edward Via, or Edward
Yes.
Via, is it?
That's a great debate. I've never, via, it's said both ways. So we'll call it VCOM. So
VCOM works for me. Was there any particular reason you chose VCOM?
I had applied to a lot of schools in the South. I wanted to stay close. I was a non-traditional candidate applying to medical school. So it made some things difficult as far as like getting an interview and getting accepted. They are a school that first started out of Virginia Tech, and with the mission to place doctors in rural Appalachia. And coming from the town I did, they saw that and they honored that, and they really extended to me not just the mere acceptance, but also a community to be a part of that valued where I came from, and that would be able to facilitate me potentially going back to a rural area or an underserved area to be able to practice. And so some of my greatest mentors that I've had in the past 10 years have came out of the VCOM schools.
All right. And you mentioned that your grandfather struggled with, it was bladder cancer, correct?
Bladder cancer, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned your grandfather struggled with bladder cancer, and you mentioned that this had an impact in the decision you made in your career choice. When did that
Yes.
start to actualize while you were a medical student?
Right. So originally, when I was in medical school, we kind of temporized the cancer, and then it began to get worse and progress. And so my original plan was, well, I'll do a short residency in the South, down around home, so that I can be there for that. But and he had metastatic bladder cancer after a cystectomy, and during my third year, he actually passed away. And so it was about that time where one of my preceptors was able to connect me with an individual in the community, where he actually, here in Sumter, I was a medical student here in Sumter during my third and fourth year, years and years ago. And so there was a urologist here in town that was involved at some time in some leadership in the AUA, and had heard that, I had an aptitude for urology. I kind of lived it, and he took me under his wing and helped me meet the right people. So like it all kind of happened all at once. My grandfather had a tough time with his urological care, which is something that I remember even now when I deal with patients. Is urology is a lot of quality of life. And so I think that was a very formidable informal education for me, that as I began to look at other specialties, I was able to gravitate towards one. I could easily have been an OBGYN, or could have been a general surgeon, but I got lucky. Like I said, I had good opportunity and good people that invested in me, and I had the aptitude for it, which, for anyone that listens to this that might be trying to decide between specialties and stuff, it's like some people know. I did not know going into medical school I wanted to be a urologist. But it kind of happened, and I'm a big believer in you kind of take opportunities that come to you and ride them out and see what happens.
I agree. So let's rewind a little bit, because I definitely want to dive into your experiences during residency. But now we're first year in medical school. Before we're Dr. Jesse Rockmore. Right now we're just Jesse Rockmore.
Gotcha.
You're a medical student. What are some of the challenges you faced throughout med school in those early years, and how'd you overcome them?
Um, Getting into med school was rather difficult. I know I mentioned a minute ago about being a non-traditional applicant. For a lot of allopathic schools, they tend to, but at least back then, they didn't really give a good look at non-traditional applicants. It's almost like you had a shelf life where you had to be a certain age and youth. But they didn't want to get anyone too old, which is one reason why I gravitated towards osteopathic, because they look at you as a whole applicant, just like they look at you as a whole patient, a gestalt, totality. And so they tend to pick more non-traditional applicants. That's kind of an issue I experienced, as well as like I'm the first in my family to kind of go to college. No one's in the medical field enough to kind of know how do you become a doctor. It was kind of like make this up as you go along. So that's why I care about podcasts like this, where people that, they didn't have this back then whenever I was trying, but, someone to have access to someone you got to know there to go there, someone having access to mentors and stuff was another challenge. And then in medical school, I think that when I went through medical school, it was during the ACGME AOA merger, which some people may not even be aware, but there used to be two separate accreditation bodies for residencies that would lobby Congress for money from CMS to create these residency programs. And so during my time in medical school, ACGME decided to merge the AOA part with them. And so there was a lot of uncertainty about what programs we would have access to and things like that. So then trying to get into a surgical subspecialty is difficult to begin with. Trying to get into one as a DO is difficult to begin with. Is also trying to get in one when the accreditation system was in a state of flummox was just unpredictable. So there was a lot of uncertainties, and I would say that, like, if you had to rewind the tape and play it back over again, who knows if it would happen the exact same way. It's like right time, right place, right person, right people. So I think those are probably the three biggest kind of challenges I faced in school to get kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay. So let's imagine for a second there's a student who's starting med school. He's at an osteopathic school and he or she wants to do a competitive specialty. What kind of advice would you have for them?
Times have changed rapidly. The culture of taking DOs into what people call now these competitive specialties, for whatever reason, has changed. It's much easier, I think. You see more and more DOs represented in these surgical subspecialties and these coveted residencies. I would say that, and I sat on some of the selection committee of looking at applicants and stuff while I was in residency. There's been a lot of change, and I can't speak with authority on any of the graduate medical education world, but there's been a change. Tests are no longer, some of them are pass fail, as far as like the accreditation test you take. That it used to be you had to have a certain score to even be interviewed by certain specialties, and that's kind of changed where it's pass fail. So they're trying to figure out, how do we interview people, because the idea would be we should interview people based off of not just their score, but who they are, or their interest in the field. So I would say, if you have a particular interest in a field, to establish yourself as best you can, whether it be in research in that area. If you can't get in research in something like urology, then research in anything. To me, it seems there's a big push for being published. Also I'm a big believer in going to conferences and networking. I think that, putting your hand in the hand of someone else is a very important thing to do for a med student in their career. It costs a little extra to go across country to conferences, which is difficult for some people to swing, but decisions are made by those who show up. That's the saying, and it matters who's in the room. So, like, find a way to do research, do poster presentations, go to conferences, have a presence, establish yourself as bona fide in whatever field you want to go into.
Sure. So it definitely helps having an idea of what you're interested in early on.
It does. I think if you're wanting to do something competitive, it does. Just because the law of large numbers, it's like the less competitive specialties have plenty of spots. You can pretty much get your pick. If you're wanting to go into anything surgical, or any of some of like the combined residencies and stuff, those are fewer spots. It's more competitive and people want that. So the sooner you can realize you might want something, the better, because you can start laying the groundwork. If that's not your desire and hope, maybe you don't have to be as on point. Some of my more, I guess, like family med, internal med, and even OB friends, they maybe had a little more fun in med school than I do. I don't know. That's probably overgeneralization, but like I did a lot of networking in med school and did a lot of travel to try and meet the people I needed. So you don't always have to have an idea of what you want to do, but it helps. It always helps to have a plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're a partner in a private practice.
Yes.
Fast forward to present day. Now, what's some of the coolest parts about that? What do you love the most about being a partner in that private practice?
So I actually got to join one of my mentors I had when I was a med student, and he kind of kept up with me through residency. And so, in a way, joining was very rewarding. It was someone I knew, for several years, and I lived in this community for years. And so they, not just him, but multiple people in this community really invested in bringing medical students here. And I'm not the only graduate from VCOM that has came back to this town and something to practice. And it's because they made such an impression on us on how much they were willing in a community of MDs in the South, which would have been 7 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. They really opened their doors and taught us and brought us under their wing and made us very good young doctors. And so coming back to this town was a lot like coming back to something very familiar. There's a huge need for urology all over the country. But South Carolina in and of itself has some of the worst per capita urologists, for the population. So like providing this care here matters to me, because this community really invested in me. So I think that's one of the coolest things is I come back and some of the patients are ones that I remember from when I was a medical student.
Wow. What would you say is some of the most common cases you do day to day?
Uh, I'm a general urologist, so my most common thing and the thing I love stones. I love doing all kinds of stone surgeries. If you had told me growing up that my career was going to be like Star Wars and you're going to give me like a laser and I go pew 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 at asteroids, I would have been like, no way, that's science fiction. That's what I'm doing all day tomorrow. So I love my stone surgeries. I do cancers from bladder and prostate. I do a little bit of reconstruction surgery, maybe like some ureteral surgeries. I do scrotal stuff. I do as much as I can with my training. I completed a residency. I didn't complete a fellowship, but I was lucky enough that the training I got at Michigan State out of Detroit was phenomenal, that I can go and do some of these specialized procedures I do. The field of urology is very broad. We treat men and women. We treat children and old and young. It doesn't really matter. I like to think of us as almost like a primary care of the surgical world, because we tend to also develop lifelong relationships with our patients. If you go to a general surgeon for a gallbladder problem, they take out your gallbladder. If general surgeon does a good job, you don't really ever see them again. I see my stone patients all the time because they continue to make stones. I see my cancer patients. I see my urinary tract infection patients. So I get to establish long relationships with them. So, and doing that in this community really mattered to me.
I love the Star Wars reference most of all.
Yeah.
So they say that medical residency is some of the most challenging work that an individual can take part in. Would you say that in your experience, your residency was extremely challenging, moderately challenging? How would you describe,
I think everyone should say that it is extremely challenging. There's no other really profession that goes through this other than maybe the military. I think going through like a boot camp situation or even like a police force, that goes like a boot camp situation. I mean, I love Ernest Hemingway. He writes, "It's trial by fire and grace under pressure." Well, these are the years that make you. These a set few years that are meant to develop you for a lifetime career, and it sets the tone for your whole career. And I think they were very challenging for me for a couple of reasons. My family is all in the South, and they really didn't come and see me up in Detroit. That's too far for them. In addition, I weathered residency during COVID, and Michigan was like the second worst state after New York. And so that was an interesting situation for us all to kind of live through, a lot of uncertainty. And then, urological surgery residency in and of itself is a very challenging residency, purely because the number of organs we operate on, men, women, children, like you have to be able to prove proficiency in a lot of different things. So like taken together, it was a rough couple of years. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade being there with those people, training with and from those people. It was a great experience. Looking back now, I mean, it made me who I am as a urologist. Now, when you're in the middle of it, you feel like you're getting screwed with your pants on. But if you do residency and you don't feel like that, I question if you're doing it correctly, no matter what your specialty is. Like, this should be the time when you are willing to go through the worst of the worst as far as the pathology you see and the volume you can see, because this is where you learn what you're made of. Because eventually you don't have that team and you go off on your own, essentially, and it's you're responsible. And to experience a residency to its utmost provides you with a well of knowledge and experience that will last you the entirety of your career.
Fantastic. So trial by fire, grace under pressure.
Yes.
What a great quote to describe the residency process. And I mean, were you working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks?
Well, I think the political answer to that is we're supposed to be capped at 80 hours. There's a big move in graduate medical education to care about wellness, to provide wellness to residents. Historically, I think residents were treated as free labor and there weren't a lot of work restrictions, and it created a lot of issues amongst residents. So, me and my co-chief, we were in charge of a team. When you make it to the last year, some specialties you're automatically a chief. Some specialties you have to get voted on or whatever. But for our program, because it was small, we were automatically a chief. And so it was important to me that everyone stayed within their 80 hours, that everyone achieved wellness. That saying, physician, heal thyself. It's like we need to be able to have wellness in our lives so that we can then, to use an osteopathic phrase, any physician can find illness or sickness, but a true physician can find wellness. So like we have to be well to be able to find wellness in our patients.
Absolutely. You have to set the example.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. It's like when you're going up a mountain, how do you climb a mountain? One step at a time, right?
Right.
So that's great. So what was one of the most intense and challenging experiences you've had in residency?
So as I progressed in residency, I think I started to see a lot of bladder cancer patients. And so I think what was kind of an existential thing for me was like equating that to what I experienced and saw my grandfather experience with his bladder cancer. And it's like, as I learned more, I began to look back and realize how, well, maybe we would have done things differently. This should have been done differently or whatever. And so like, we as physicians, we're mortal beings. We have our own emotions and experiences. And so, as I would encounter these patients, they were a lot like my grandfather. Like it would make me think towards the past, and I don't want to say regretful, but definitely it provided perspective on maybe how we would have done things differently. I think that was an emotional challenge that even now, every now and then I'll encounter a patient that kind of strikes a memory, and I try to counsel those patients based off of not just me as a urologist, but I even let them know that, I have lived as a family member of someone who's experienced this, and how you feel about what you're going through matters. So I experienced that in residency, and I brought it up earlier, but like COVID was very scary for some of us. Michigan was very bad, and we didn't have a lot of good information. And because of our level as a resident, I think that we were taking care of patients at a time when and even now we don't really know what our exposure what has done. You know, we were thankfully some of the first to get vaccines, but my family didn't get them for a long time. So then I didn't come home for a long time because I wasn't sure, by working in it as much as I did, like, am I carrying some strain? Do I want to bring that home to my family members that are older and elderly that didn't get vaccines for like months and months after I did because of being a healthcare worker? So like I think it's a struggle for anyone that does residency somewhere away from their social support. Uh, that's why the people you go to residency for, like, you're going to spend 3 to 5 years with these people. And even before we got on this call, I talked to my co-chief that I graduated with. Like, we talk like all the time. So like the bonds you make in residency are what help you overcome whatever you might experience. Some people experience loss of loved ones. Some people have kids. Some people have different things. And you know, these band of people that fate has kind of put in your circle, you need them and they need you, no matter who they are or anything. And so any challenges you can think of in residency can be made better by the fact that you are a part of a team and you're all there for the same purpose. So even throughout COVID, we were all there for each other. And, you know, I wasn't able to see my family, but I had friends that took me with them to their families for Christmas and Easter, and they're some of my best friends now. So like the people you meet through this process are as important as whatever technical skills you're learning.
Yeah. You know, they say shared hardship is one of the best ways to form a bond with other people.
Or common commiseration. Yes.
Comic.
Common
Exactly.
commiseration. Yes, I agree.
So when you moved from South Carolina to Michigan,
Right.
were you just by yourself?
Just me. I'm single, still am. And so I had a dog at the time. Uh, he passed away of liposarcoma while I was in residency, so that was a little rough. But so yeah, I moved. So back then urology had to do, it was 1 and 4. So you had to do 1 year of general surgery, and then you got to do your urology residency. They've since done away with that, and it's all 5 years urology. So I did general surgery at Detroit Receiving uh, with Wayne State, and absolutely loved it. Had a great time. A lot of my friends from that intern year I'm still friends with. If anyone knows about like trauma and trauma surgery, like Detroit Receiving is like a big name in that. I was like really lucky to have gone there. And then I moved out to the suburbs for my residency, where we cover multiple hospitals, one of which is a hospital that sat on 8 Mile.
Mm.
So uh, I moved around a lot during residency because of how my program was set up. So I went from South Carolina to Detroit to suburban Detroit, but I'm glad I did it. It was, you know, having, you know, some people are married, some people are married to someone who, or in a relationship with someone that will do the couples match and like stuff like that matters. I was lucky enough, believe it or not, I had freedom in my life. The only thing the decision I had to make was for myself. And some people have, I think, they have to make it with someone else, and you know that's a hard decision to make. I could go wherever I wanted, and wherever it took me, and wherever I felt like the training would be the best for me. And so that was Detroit. I mean, like I looked other places in the country. Would like to have stayed local in the South, but ultimately the training I knew I would get in Detroit was the best. That's why I made them my top one. So
Fantastic. Did it take you a while to get adjusted, or did you just kind of settle in relatively quickly?
well, I don't like cold weather, and so the first thing I did, Carhartt, you know, the clothing line originated in Detroit. It was workwear. So as soon as I moved to Detroit in July, first thing I did was go to Carhartt store, and I got a full winter suit in preparation, and it was not that bad. But it's a different place, you know, and I was the only one from the South, so I'm the only one that had an accent. My accent is much less now than it was when I went up there because they couldn't understand a word I said. But it was an interesting town. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing a lot of Michigan since because of COVID, I couldn't leave the state. So I actually traveled around and did my vacations in the Upper Peninsula, in different parts of the state of Michigan. A beautiful state, beautiful place to go if you ever get to go. A great place for graduate medical education. And I credit Michigan State with that because they have created this very intricate network throughout the state for osteopathic medical education where they have multiple schools. They're our program, even though it was in Detroit, was housed out of Lansing in Michigan State. So it came with this small feel of being in a community setting while having the backing of a major university. So like anyone that's looking for residency or even med school or whatever, like, and they're a DO, you should look at Michigan, really.
DO all the way and go Spartans.
Yes.
So, did you do a lot of research as a resident and in med school?
So no, a lot of my suggestions now that I'll give is with me being faculty at VCOM, they give me like a lot of the surgical students to kind of mentor and stuff. And a lot of the suggestions I give to them is do as I say, not as I do. Uh, I was the first to match from urology from my school. We really didn't know how to do that at the time. The school was fairly new. And so my research was very minimal. I think I had submitted a case presentation. And then in residency, research is not my thing. To graduate from residency, you have to do something. So I did a little bit, but it works for some people. I come from a very blue collar background. I come from farmers and welders. And so like urology is just, it's water in, water out. Like that most of the time, my daily question is water in, water out. And so it's very technical. I'm just a plumber. And so the research thing didn't really jive with me, but luckily we worked as a team and they were members of our team that enjoyed research, and I did whatever they told me. But if you're going through the process now, do as I say, not as I do. Get involved in research. It matters to prove to people that don't know you that you can do that, because it matters too much. It's a requirement in residency.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot more requirements these days in terms of research and scores and extracurriculars and volunteering. Would you agree?
I I think it takes a lot. I think that one thing I see students looking at, like all those things you mentioned, they're all legs on a stool. And they think if they're missing a leg, then if they build up the other legs of that stool, then they've got a chance. And it's honestly, it's about being as well-rounded as you can be, because there's certain things you can't make up for. Like if you did no research and you're wanting to get into like a rather competitive residency that's known to do research, that's a problem. If your test scores are not that great and you're wanting to do something, competitive, that can always be overcame with like more research or more extracurricular. Ultimately, it comes down to when you submit your application, there's something about, if you've got everything that's like on par with everyone else, is there something about you, about what you've done, your personal statement that really clicks with the program director or associate program director or whoever's reviewing applications? I've said it a number of times, there's a lot of luck. The match is, it's a tough needle to thread for a lot of people. And you really have to take confidence in, I did the best I could at the time with what I knew to do. And if it doesn't work out the way you wanted to, then that's not a necessarily personal reflection on you. It's fate, it's destiny, it's something beyond you. It's like, as long as you did everything you could at the time with what you knew and had, then whatever the outcome is, you'll have no regret.
All right. So, Dr. Rockmore, would you have any advice that we haven't discussed already for an undergrad, med student, resident, or beyond?
So, becoming a physician is not an easy task. It takes the majority of your youth. It takes a lot of your time. I think everyone owes it to themselves that if you have a desire to become a physician, you need to ask yourself why you're doing it. I think that is the most important thing. I went to school with people who did it because their parents were, or for money, status, acclaim, whatever. It's like you got to find some deep intrinsic reason why you want to go through this, because it doesn't feel great all the time. And your intrinsic reason for wanting to do it has to be what keeps you warm at night. It's like, what is your drive? Why, because it's got ups and downs like every other career field, but it is something different. It is a career field unlike any other. Find have a spirit journey, whatever it is, dig down deep and really find something, some gravitas, something with some meat that will sustain you throughout the whole long process, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and it's a long one. And know why you're doing it, and once you figure it out, that's what you have to have faith. You gotta have faith in yourself and faith in the reason why you're doing this. Because I'm not sure if I hadn't experienced what I experienced in my family, that if I was just doing this for fun, which some people do, I don't know, and it is fun. But if I've just been doing it for, I guess, for lack of a better term, a more superficial reason, I think that the hard days would have been even harder, because I didn't have a good foundation on why I wanted to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in my own life, as I've prepared to start medical school, I've been doing some of that internal reflection and trying to dig deep and really find, like you said, what's going to keep you warm at night, what's going to
Right.
keep you going when you're in those hard times. And I think personally, having had injuries myself requiring orthopedic surgeries, I've kind of
Yeah.
conjured up the idea that I want to be able to learn as much as I can, because I do love learning about anatomy and science and
Right.
medicine. It's like I want to learn as much as I can and then use that knowledge to have a genuine positive impact on other people, like my surgeon did for me.
Right.
And what would you say? Of course, you've mentioned your grandfather, and certainly that has a large impact on your drive. Was there anything else that maybe you could pinpoint that you kind of found within yourself that helped you keep going?
Um, I think there's a little bit in me that is, I look at some things and I go, I can do that. I think I can do that. That it might, that whatever spark of ambition that most, I think you have to want to be a physician. You have to have some spark of ambition. That when you look at something complicated and even scary, and you go, I can do that. You don't shirk away from complexity. No matter how uncomfortable it will be, it's like that's a personality trait that I think that almost anyone going into medicine really should figure out if they have. Like if you that view of complexity it is not a vice. Complexity is intriguing, and that to conquer that is a personality trait. I discovered when I was in residency, Ryan Holiday. I'll try to tell anyone that wants to go be a surgeon or even a physician. Ryan Holiday, the Daily Stoic, he really dumbs down a lot of complex philosophy down to, and that ability to, this isn't like a stoicism quote, but it's actually kind of biblical. Study to show thyself approved. It's like you want to know more so that you can conquer complexity for your approval, for other people's approval. I don't know, but this study to show thyself approved is that desire to, I'm not okay with the mundane. I want to relish in complexity. And I think that like really studying like Seneca and Epictetus and all these, and Marcus Aurelius, like that taking on those things are what make us, and how you handle that matters. Like the writings of those philosophers have really helped me as a surgeon.
Stoicism is awesome. That's giving me chills just thinking about that. Being able
I
to,
love Ryan Holiday.
he is fantastic. I've read a couple of his books as well.
Yeah.
Such a great
The
philosopher.
Obstacle is the Way. Like in anyone being a physician needs to read The Obstacle is the Way. They truly do, because it's like that's what I'm talking about. The obstacle, the complexity. It's like marching towards that is what any physician has to do. Like you have to do it, and you have to want that.
You do. I'm trying to think the quote. It's what stands in the way becomes the way.
Yes.
Something like that. I wish I could remember it off the top of my
Yeah.
head. I used to.
Yeah. He's got a lot of great quotes. He's great.
So yeah, Marcus Aurelius too. Meditations, highly recommend for anyone who hasn't read it.
Yes.
So Dr. Rockmore, thanks a lot for sharing so much about your journey and your experience. I'm sure that's going to be insightful to many of our listeners out there. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on, Curtis. Appreciate it. Hope it was helpful.
Absolutely.